Hey everybody. So, conservative media is weird, and for some reason I watch a lot of it, definitely too much of it. And so I thought it would be nice, during this gobble Thanksgiving month of November, to start a series of 4 videos about conservatives and the things they do and say. And rather than trying to offer some robust debunkings of these people or something like that, I'm just gonna tell you some loose, meandering stories about them. Stories that I think are funny, or moving, or thought-provoking. Important to me in some way. So, I don't want to waste your time with a lengthy introduction explaining why I'm doing this or what the point is. Let's get started and we'll figure it out from there. This one's a real shorty too, so I hope you enjoy that. So there's a YouTube video I love called Ben Shapiro Trashes John Lennon's Imagine.
John Lennon's Imagine is a monstrosity. It's a moral, musical monstrosity. It is the cave troll of all that is good and holy.
And before we really get into it, I think it's important to acknowledge how strange it is that this video exists in the first place, that Ben Shapiro had 10 minutes worth of stuff to say about the topic. Imagine is, at least to some extent, a communist manifesto. In a very generic way, it proposes that a godless, stateless, moneyless world would be a good thing. And considering the fact that Ben Shapiro is very much not a communist, it seems like his response to the song could be as simple as, "You know that ideology? I spend my life disagreeing with that." Since Lennon doesn't put any real work into arguing the song's thesis, Shapiro doesn't need to provide some lengthy response. But for kind of obvious reasons, that's not what happens here. See, Shapiro isn't in the business of saying he disagrees with something and quietly moving on. Instead, he is deeply invested in the pageantry of online debate, in revealing that his opponents are not just wrong, but also wrong-headed, idiotic, shameful. His job is to win as much as possible by saying as many things as possible.
Let me explain to you something, okay? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame. Who, me? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame, watch Game of Thrones first. The bad guys shout shame.
Woo! And the result of this, in the case of Ben Shapiro versus John Lennon, is that Shapiro comes off looking like an unbelievable buffoon. Like, in the first moments of Imagine, Lennon talks about all the people in the world living for today, and that just sets Ben off.
What he just said is the most immoral thing you could possibly say. Imagine all the people living for today. That's basically what we have. Okay, imagine all the people living for today means you don't plan for the future. It means you don't care about your kids. It means you don't care what happens tomorrow. It means you don't care about anybody else. You just care about you. Okay, this is the most selfish morality possible. If all the people lived just for today, they would screw everything in sight and kill all their enemies.
It's hard to come up with something to say about this because it's just so incredibly and self-evidently ridiculous. Lennon isn't referring to today like these 24 hours, right? The stanza is about imagining if people didn't believe in an afterlife. In that case, they wouldn't count on and organize their lives around some unprovable reward, and would instead work to make the world a better place right now, like today, for instance. Or when Lennon says, "Imagine a world with nothing to kill or die for," Ben goes on this long thing about how, how about people harming kids? Isn't that worth killing or dying for?
There's nothing worth killing or dying for? Really, how about like the torture of children? Is that worth killing or dying for? How about the murder of 100 million people? Is that worth killing or dying for? Turns out that in your happy-dappy little land here, where everybody is just wonderful and joyous, this assumes a goodness to human nature that just does not exist.
And again, what? Looking at the context of the song, something Shapiro is strangely unwilling to do, Lennon isn't saying, what if nobody ever did anything wrong that required intervention? Rather, he's talking about countries here, the imposition of nationalism and the violence that it causes.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for.
It's not just a bland statement about how killing people is bad and what if we didn't do it. Or at one point, Lennon talks about imagining if there were no possessions, and then Shapiro goes on this rant about how the only thing separating primitive society from the innovations of history was the idea of private property.
I have a good reason why we shouldn't share the land. It's called several thousand years of no human development, and then Western civilization. That's why we should not share the land. Private property ownership, the idea of labor, the idea of owning what you produce, is one of the greatest goods ever discovered in the history of civilization. We would all be hunter-gatherer, nomad peoples with no history, and we'd all die at 30 if it weren't for human civilization and private property ownership and the incentive that suggests that you own what you produce.
And, I don't even want to do this anymore. To say that property rights, the modern conception of which came to us via Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, is the sole reason why human history happened, that's dumb. Everybody who's taken 6th grade world history with Mrs. Savage knows that the forerunner to civilization was primarily agriculture. Agriculture, which allowed the end of nomadism and the beginning of more stable, organized city-states with large, unified cultures. Agriculture, which meant people were able to spend less time hunting and gathering and could instead create and innovate with their surplus resources. Agriculture, which is the reason why every single early society sprouted along the floodplains of rivers. Not just in the West. That's racist to say that. They also came about in Mesopotamia and Egypt and China and the Americas and India. And do you think all the people in those civs owned what they produced? No, and certainly not in any kind of formalized ethical framework. Many of them lived in empires and shit, with leaders who often forcefully took as much as they could. I mean, obviously, this is a reductive analysis, I get that, but to think that the wheel of history was turned only in the West, and only by the innovation of private property, is genuinely baffling, and I'm going to sue Ben Shapiro for saying it. But anyway, while I do personally love watching Ben Shapiro make an ass out of himself, showing that he literally can't interact with an idea he disagrees with without letting his brain explode, that's not really the reason I'm interested in this video. No. The reason I love it, the reason I watch it sometimes when I'm in a bad mood, comes from one basic fact. That in his attempt to destroy Imagine, tear it limb from limb, leave us with the impression that it has nothing worthwhile to say, Ben Shapiro plays the song. He platforms John Lennon. Now, this is obviously a bit of a digression, but let's take a minute and talk about Imagine. So, I know it might sound trite, because the song is played constantly, but in my opinion, Imagine is nothing less than a masterpiece. One that's a lot more complicated than it might seem on first blush. The first thing we might notice about it is that there aren't a lot of songs that do what it does. Besides something like the Cha-Cha Slide, which is obviously completely different, I can't name a single piece of music that calls on the audience to perform a set of specific tasks over the course of its runtime. Imagine no religion, it asks you, no countries, no possessions. What's more, the act of imagining is not trivialized by the song. It's not always so simple. Sure, it's not hard to imagine there not being an afterlife.
Imagine there's no heaven. See as if you try.
But when it comes to imagining there being no possessions, Lennon expresses doubt, a challenge.
Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can.
In this way, I think Imagine says something really poignant. Because at the end of the day, the song isn't asking us to do very much at all, is it? Lennon isn't asking us to buy something, vote for somebody, something like that. Instead, he just wants us to come to one realization, that so much of the pain in our world is caused by ideas that we came up with. We invented religion, countries, possessions, and whether or not you like those things or think they're good for the world, it's uncontroversial to say that they have left us with a lot of bad shit. working to get to an afterlife that probably doesn't exist instead of devoting our lives to the world around us, fighting each other because we fundamentally think that the people in our country are more deserving than the people in their country, allowing some people to starve and live terrible lives while others live in impossible decadence. But the upshot is, these are our ideas, nobody else's. And as such, we can change them, do what we want with them. We can imagine something different. And for now, within the context of the song, that simple yet surprisingly challenging action is enough. And Shapiro plays that. Between making elitist comments about who can and can't be good at music.
Okay, none of them knew how to read music. Call me an elitist. For me to call you a great musician, you have to know how to read music.
Between implying that John Lennon is burning in hell.
Imagine there's no heaven.
There isn't for you, buddy.
Between saying his nonsense points, he plays the song. And the emotional effect of this choice is startling, at least to me. I want to play you my favorite part of the video now. It's kind of long, but also too good to describe.
And on the anniversary of his death, we're going to make fun of the worst song ever written, so here we go.
They say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
That's the problem. He's not the only one.
I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions.
Here we go. Full-scale comedy. In this giant house, by the way. He's standing in a giant-ass house.
No need for greed or hunger.
No need for greed or hunger.
A brotherhood of man.
Brotherhood of man that has never existed and never will.
Imagine all the people sharing all the world.
God, this is so childish. And there's
You
Yoko
may
Ono singing
say
like crazy.
I'm a dreamer.
Okay, we can cut it there.
If I were making a movie where Ben Shapiro is the bad guy, I couldn't do a better job of it than this scene does. Because everything about it tells us that John Lennon is winning. The comments Ben Shapiro makes here are aggressively vacant and unnecessary. Look at his big house. That's the problem, he's not the only one. No need for greed or hunger, blah 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 blah. Lennon is played loudly, so loudly that at times Shapiro is genuinely hard to make out. The song itself is, at least to my ear, just beautiful to listen to. And all this comes together to produce the aesthetic experience of John Lennon posthumously owning Ben Shapiro. Not just rendering him wrong, but also irrelevant. A nagging, impotent figure who will try, but ultimately fail, to get what he wants. You know, it's easy to doubt the actual importance of the song Imagine. Sure, it sounds nice, but what does it really accomplish? To just think about the world being different. And if nothing else, this video comes in a really elegant way to tell us that John Lennon was right. After all, if the simple act of imagining is enough to send this weirdo, Ben Shapiro, into an intellectual tailspin, if it causes him to whine about how it's the worst thing ever made, if it so obviously threatens him, makes him sweat, then it must be kinda meaningful. So that's the end of the video, and now it's time for my Patreon question and stuff, but first, a word from our sponsors, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in design, business, and even more than that. Design is a surprisingly big part of my job. I have to make thumbnails all the time, and so it was pretty great to take this graphic design fundamentals course. The two ladies who taught it seemed really interesting and cool, and they actually taught me a lot. But I'm just one guy. Signing up on Skillshare Premium gives you access to every class. Do you want to learn about how to be productive? So what are you waiting for? Skillshare is giving a 2-month free trial to people who click the link in my description box. And after that, it's only like $10 a month. Woo! So with all that, thanks for watching, everybody. I really hope you liked this one because there's going to be 3 more in the series, and they're only going to get weirder, I think. Anyway, if you did like it, like, comment, subscribe, and give me money on Patreon if you want to. Leftist Tech Support asks, with Thanksgiving around the corner, what's your favorite Thanksgiving dish? And I do think this is uncontroversial. The answer is stuffing and Brussels sprouts. It's a tie between those two things, both delicious, but I'm honestly a big fan of Thanksgiving food in general. I feel like turkey gets a short shrift, people treat it unfairly. God. Mashed potatoes are good. Okay. Bye.